Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well this morning or this evening, depending on where you are out there in the world. This morning, or today, I'll read you number 12, the key development exercises. The experience of mind and body unification when we are in a quiet state is easy. However, true unification is not disturbing the mind and body unification, even when we are in motion. Excuse me. The key exercises are training us to maintain mind and body unification constantly, whether we are awake or sleeping. By applying them to everything in our daily life, we can perform to the best of our ability in all things. So maybe the most often question that I get from people is, I'm able to keep one point, no problem, when I'm meditating or when everything is going my way. But when I'm out in the world and I'm being challenged or something becomes difficult, then I'm not so able to keep one point. What do I do? So what you do is key development exercises according to Toi Sensei. So Toi Sensei, maybe when he says key development exercises there, you think of Oneness Rhythm Taiso, Aiki Taiso, Hitori Waza. These are what we call key development exercises in class, but actually everything is key development exercise, if you think about it. Certainly all the techniques, Bokken, Joe, cutting Bokken, key development exercise. Don't you think so? Everything we do in Aikido is key development exercise. And of course, that's all in the dojo. Shinichi Toi Sensei, Shinichi Suzuki Sensei, my teacher on Maui, liked to give me exercises that I can do, we call in daily life. Or in other words, in a more lifelike or realistic situation that I might face at work or in public somewhere, at a gathering, at a party, at a dinner, at a breakfast, something like that. I gave you one last week, and this key exercise was when someone mistreats you in some way, or insults you, diminishes you, or attempts to diminish you in some way, your normal reaction is probably to resist. In fact, to fight back, to defend yourself, to stick up for yourself, to say that you're not wrong, that they're wrong, in fact. And maybe this then leads to some kind of serious confrontation. And these kind of confrontations can not only lead to serious consequences, but can last for a lifetime. So best to be avoided. But so what do we do? In this exercise, Suzuki Sensei asked me to just listen. When someone is treating me that way, just listen. And while I'm listening, notice very carefully what feeling is arising in me and what is the source of that feeling. Of course, the source is the subconscious mind, but what is the nature of that feeling? And what is it that I'm doing? And I think if we notice, we'll see that this is a kind of course, defense mechanism because we already feel somewhat diminished. We can't stand, our ego can't stand to have someone else add fuel to that fire. So, when we just can't depend on the ego because The ego is, its whole purpose is to make us feel good about ourselves, to defend our position. So anytime that someone is pointing out something that might be useful to us, if we just listened, we're liable to say, hold it right there. That's enough. And anytime, sometimes when people are offering us something that really is not a good idea for us, because our ego is interested in self-attribution, it might very well say, oh yes, yes, I'll have some of that. Thank you very much. So it's very undependable part of ourselves. So we have to learn to watch carefully and notice when this is happening. That's what that exercise, that's what all these key exercises are all about. So I'll give you another one for today. So if you are at a dinner, for instance, a party, always when these things happen when we're at gatherings with other people, and someone brings up a subject that they're passionate about, or that they feel they know a lot about, and but it's a subject that you feel either you know a lot about, or you feel strongly about, or maybe you also notice that the same thing happened to you once. And so in normal circumstance, you might wait your turn and speak up about it, or you might even interrupt the person rudely, just because you're so anxious to add your 2 cents to the program. So in this situation, Suzuki says, once again, don't say anything, just listen. And as you're listening to everyone else discuss the subject that you yourself are the expert in, see how that makes you feel. Notice what that makes you feel like. These are really, I found, useful exercises to do because I'm guilty of all of that. And so it really helps me learn to listen, and learn not just to listen to other people, because when we're listening to someone else, we're listening to ourselves. We're noticing, we're open. So we're noticing what's going on within us. And when we get wrapped up in a conversation, or worse yet, in an argument, we are completely unaware of what's going on within us. I know everyone is confronted by this really daily. This is the nature of having a conditioned subconscious mind, or an ego that is stuffed with self-importance and self-need. So it's not wrong. That's just the way we are, folks. But it's really important for us in our practice, in order to be more useful human beings to our fellow man, to learn to notice what's going on with us. And then little by little, just like we're always saying, Doi Sensei's teaching, our subconscious mind receives a positive drop when we listen, when we notice. So if we do this moment by moment every day, of course, little by little, we become a more useful and supportive and generous, kind-hearted human being. Okay, let's do some key breathing, please. All right. So, when I talk about becoming a more useful person, what I mean is, for instance, in your work, Um, just as an example, you definitely want to be the kind of person that everyone turns to when someone is being difficult. For instance, Suzuki Sensei, was a police officer and ultimately became a detective. But he was the one that everybody turned to in difficult situations. He was the one that never had to draw his gun once in his entire police career. Never opened it, never pulled it out. He told me a story I'll tell you very quickly. One night about 2 in the morning, they called him. He lived just right around the corner from the police station. And they called him from the police station and said, Mr. Suzuki, can you come please and help us? We have some problem. So he said, all right. So he got dressed and he came to the dojo. I mean, the police station. And here were 3 officers and a man that was clearly drunk, inebriated, and in handcuffs. And he was screaming at them. And he was hurt. They'd hit him a few times, and they were hurt. They'd been hit a few times. And so we walked in, and he said in his voice, what seems to be the problem here? And they all 3 of them started talking at once, telling him how what a jerk this guy was, and how all the damage that he'd done, and how he needed to be. They couldn't get him to go down to the jail cell. They were afraid they were going to have to knock him out to do it. And he said, well, Suzuki Sensei said, well, first of all, take the cuffs off this man. And they looked at him like, are you out of your mind? He will go crazy on us. He said, no. I'll take responsibility. Remove the cuffs from this gentleman. And Sensei always called people gentlemen. He didn't use slang when he was referring to someone like this kind of situation. So they took the cuffs off. Right away, the person came over and stood next to Suzuki Sensei. And these officers were slack-jawed, wondering, what? And the Suzuki Sensei said, you realize, to this gentleman, you realize you have to go to the cell and spend the night because you're drunk and disorderly. And he goes, yes, I realize, no problem. If you take me, I'll go. These guys try to take me down there, I'll beat them up. And sure enough, Suzuki Sensei put him in his cell, and they thanked him profusely, and he went home. This is not an unusual story for the kind of person that he was. But this is just an example of, this is not something you should do. It's just an example that if you're practicing key development exercises in your daily life, this is a good example of how you might interact with people. And not practicing key exercises in daily life, not practicing the spirit of non-dissension, is obviously what got these officers in trouble with the guy. Okay, so if you have any comments, or please share with us what this brings up in you. Prakash.
What it brings up is an occasion when I was a substitute teacher at Maui High School, and one of the kids got in my face and wanted to punch me out. And instead of reacting, I just kept one point, and it diffused the anger. And then I saw Aikido in action there. And that was very different because I grew up in Glasgow, which is a very violent place. So I was always used to being a fighter and responding in a fighting way. But in that situation, I really practiced non-dissension. So
Great. That's great. Thank you so much for that. I love that story. How about Melly Stokesbury?
Good morning, Sensei, and everybody.
Good morning.
What this brings up for me is I have a member of the family who is very, very adamant about politics that are absolutely the opposite of my politics, and wants to talk about them a lot, and wants to bring things up, and will use the tiniest excuse of some peripheral reference to bring up something. And over the last few years, I've really been practicing listening and finding some way to find something that I can say that will find some little piece of agreement and change the subject.
Yeah, finding a piece of agreement is a really useful thing, huh? I mean, we're all, when we're having a discussion, we're all wondering why we're not being listened to. And we're usually not listening to the other person because we don't like what they're saying, or we don't agree, or we don't, we've already thought through that. This guy just doesn't know what he's talking about. But there's always something, isn't there? And particularly if we care, if we turn to our heart instead of our head, we can usually find something that we can embrace about the other person. Thank you. That's a great story. I'd like to ask Toby Vogels to say something.
Good evening, Sensei. Good morning.
Hi, good.
I'm always, when I hear these kind of stories, I'm always wondering how you would know what to do in that kind of situation. Because he did something quite different from what people would do and how people would react. So I also remember this story about the person with the water pistol in the bar you told us once about.
Yes.
Why would someone do that, or how would you know what to do in that kind of situation? Because it's so extremely different from how people would react. You cannot think of it before. You don't have this protocol that you go into and then do something.
Yeah, okay, let me say something, Toby, about that. That's a really good question. How are you supposed to know? And Suzuki Sensei taught me a lot about this, and he said, the problem that we have is when we get in these situations, we're thinking, we're trying to decide, we're trying to figure out what to do. What is the correct thing to do? What is the efficient, useful, peaceful, politically correct even thing to do? And he said, so that never works. It's just like every other situation. When your brain is engaged, everything else is shut down. You need to feel, he said, he taught me, you feel the energy in the room. You feel what is going on between people. And you can feel where the opening is. You can feel what needs to be done. And often, like Prakash said, you don't say anything at all. I had a situation where I was in charge of some homes, and it was a rainstorm and one home was leaking, and I was trying to take care of it. And I was up on the roof making a lot of noise with a hammer and some stuff in the middle of the storm. And the guy came up on the roof, and he was a local fellow who didn't like me to begin with because I was Caucasian. And he tried to throw me off the roof, which would have hurt me. And somehow I avoided that. I avoided a confrontation there with him. Somehow I got out of it. I used reason. I think I did talk, but it wasn't satisfactory. And as I left, with his roof still leaking, he was screaming at me. So no real success there. And then a while later, I was in doing a takeout from a restaurant. My pregnant wife was in the car, and this was in the early days and hardly any traffic. And his wife was driving him to town, and I saw them coming, and he stopped. He made her stop in the middle of the road, and he got out and he came across, and I went, oh boy. So he came up to me and he said, he is stupid, you know, and said some rather nasty things, and then said, and I just shut up. This time I didn't talk. Suzuki Sensei had already begun teaching me. So I just didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. And he said, you know, if I hit you, I could knock you out. I could just end your day. How's that? How about if I hit you? And I said, okay, you know, take your shot. You might and you might not. But if you do, why don't you think about how you're going to feel afterward? Are you going to feel proud of yourself? And he looked very confused and went over and got in the car and left. And 2 years later, I was on a men's volleyball team in the middle of a gymnasium, and the opposing team came out for the final, and there he was. And you know what he did? He walked, this is 2 years later, he walked across before the game under the net and came over and shook my hand and said, I want to thank you for what you said to me that day. That changed my life. Okay, so that I did it out of ignorance. I didn't know what else to do. But you never know. See, you don't know. You can't know. And you're not trying to succeed. Really, you just want to have peace in your heart, have nonviolence in your heart. And I think that's all there is about it. Of course, like Suzuki Sensei used to teach the police, and he would say to these cadets, you know, I'm not teaching you what to do in a difficult situation, because in 2 weeks of Aikido, you're not going to learn, you know. In fact, he said 20 years of Aikido. You're not going to pull some fancy technique out of your hat. It's learning to be present and listen to the situation and perceive what it is that is called for. And it's never called for accelerating the violence or accelerating the bad feeling. Nothing ever calls for that. So if that's what happens, you aren't listening. Now, this is really good, really good. This is what he kept trying to teach me about, being aware of the situation. Okay? Something to consider. And really, all we're doing here in these classes is presenting something to consider. And if you like it, you practice it. Okay, anyone else would like to say something before we go?
Hi, Sensei.
Hello, Carlos.
Yeah, so good morning. It's, you know, I was thinking before you started talking about this, about being self-conscious. We're often being told, say, cutting bokken and so forth, about being self-conscious, watching ourselves. But you seem to be talking about that right now, the difference between self-conscious watching, trying to figure something out, and just being aware, self-awareness, noticing what's happening within and around us. Am I on the right track with that?
Exactly. I mean, that's a perfect summary of our teaching. Excuse me, because we're always in this situation. This is always what we're doing moment by moment, whether we're in an easy situation whether we're all by ourselves meditating, whether we're in a big group and it's peaceful, or we're in a big group and it's trouble. It's always the same practice. It never changes. Thank you very much. See you later. Como arigatou gozaimasu.